The rain fell steadily on the small cemetery in Charleston, each drop seeming to carry the weight of grief that hung over the gathered mourners. Marcus Thompson lay in the mahogany casket, dressed in his Sunday best, the same suit he'd worn to his college graduation just 2 years ago. At 24, he should have been starting his career, maybe finding someone to share his life with. Instead, his family and friends stood in black, their faces etched with sorrow and rage. Detective Ray Coleman stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He wore his dress uniform, chest puffed out with false pride. To anyone watching, he might have looked like a respectful officer paying his respects. But those close enough could hear his whispered comments. Should have complied, he muttered to his partner, loud enough for several mourners to hear. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. An elderly woman in the front row, Marcus's grandmother, turned at the sound, her eyes filling with fresh tears. Coleman's smirk widened. 24 years old and couldn't follow simple instructions, he continued, his voice carrying across the quiet ceremony. Reached for something in his car. What did he expect would happen? The mourners began to shift uncomfortably. Some turned to stare at Coleman with disgust, others with fear. Everyone knew what had really happened that night. Marcus had been reaching for his wallet when Coleman told him to show ID. The body cam footage had been clear, but somehow it hadn't been enough. Ray, his partner, whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Maybe we should have. Nah, Coleman interrupted, his voice growing bolder. These people need to understand. Actions have consequences. Maybe if more of them learned that lesson, Officer Coleman. The voice cut through the rain and Coleman's monologue like a blade. It was quiet, controlled, but carried an authority that made everyone present turn toward its source. A man stepped forward from among the mourners, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and eyes that held the kind of stillness that comes only from seeing real combat, wore a simple black suit, but something in his bearing, the way he moved with precise, economical steps, marked him as military. The mourners seemed to part naturally as he approached. Coleman's smirk faltered slightly. And you are? Lieutenant Colonel David Thompson, the man replied, stopping just a few feet away. Delta Force. And Marcus was my younger brother. The color drained from Coleman's face. His partner took a step back, suddenly very interested in his shoes. The cemetery had gone completely silent except for the steady patter of rain. David's voice remained level, professional. I've spent the last month reviewing every piece of evidence from that night. The body cam footage, the witness statements, the forensic reports. All of it. Coleman tried to regain his composure. Look, I don't know what you think you found, but I found a pattern, David continued, never raising his voice. 17 complaints in 5 years. 3 other shootings, all involving black men. All ruled justified. All with convenient gaps in the evidence. You don't know what you're talking about, Coleman blustered. I've been cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigation was handled locally. By your friends. Your drinking buddies. The same people who go to your barbecues. David took another step closer. But federal investigations work differently, Officer Coleman. Especially when they involve civil rights violations. Especially when the victim's brother has friends in very high places. The rain seemed to fall harder now, drumming against the canvas tent that covered the gravesite. Coleman's uniform was getting soaked, but he seemed frozen in place. The FBI will be contacting you Monday morning, David said. They'll want to discuss some interesting financial transactions you've made recently. Cash deposits that don't match your salary. They'll also want to talk about your text messages. The ones where you and your friends joke about cleaning up the streets. The ones where you place bets on how many troublemakers you'll encounter during your shifts. Coleman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. I have rights. You have the same rights my brother had that night, David replied. The same rights he tried to invoke when he said, "Please don't shoot 17 times before you pulled that trigger." The mourners had pressed closer now, forming a circle around the confrontation. Coleman looked around desperately, but found no sympathy in any of the faces surrounding him. Marcus was a teacher, David continued, his voice finally carrying a trace of emotion. He tutored kids after school. He volunteered at the community center. He was afraid of spiders and cried during Disney movies. He called our mother every Sunday and never missed sending a birthday card. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, Marcus's wallet, the same one he'd been reaching for that night. "This is what you thought was a weapon." A 24-year-old math teacher's wallet, with pictures of his family and a receipt from the bookstore where he bought supplies for his classroom with his own money because the school couldn't afford them. Coleman stumbled backward, his face pale and sweaty despite the cool rain. I made a split-second decision. You thought nothing," David cut him off. "You saw a young black man and you decided he was guilty of something. Guilty of existing in a space you thought he didn't belong. Guilty of being confident instead of cowering. Guilty of being my brother." David stepped back and looked around at the gathering, his voice carrying to every person present. "Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms," he said. "Sometimes it comes from making sure the truth can't be buried with the victim. Sometimes it comes from having friends who won't let a brother's death become just another statistic." He turned back to Coleman, who was now visibly shaking. "You wanted to mock my brother at his funeral. You wanted to make jokes about his death in front of the people who loved him. I want you to remember this moment, Officer Coleman. I want you to remember it when the federal agents knock on your door. I want you to remember it when you're sitting in a cell, wondering how your life fell apart so quickly." David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried clearly across the silent cemetery. "Most of all, I want you to remember that Marcus Thompson wasn't just another victim you could dispose of and forget. He was my brother. And I never forget. I never forgive. And I never stop fighting for the people I love." Coleman tried to speak, but no words came. He stood there for another moment, rain streaming down his face, before turning and stumbling toward his patrol car. His partner followed, neither of them looking back. As they drove away, David turned back to his brother's casket. The mourners began to gather around him, offering quiet words of support and solidarity. The minister resumed the service, speaking of love, loss, and the hope for justice, but in the weeks that followed, Coleman would learn that David Thompson was a man of his word. The FBI investigation uncovered years of corruption and abuse. Text messages, financial records, and witness testimony painted a picture of an officer who had long ago stopped serving and protecting anyone but himself. Coleman was eventually convicted on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations and conspiracy. His conviction opened the door for other victims to come forward, other families to find their voice. Marcus Thompson's death became the catalyst for real change in Charleston's police department. New oversight procedures, body cameras that couldn't be turned off, and a civilian review board with real authority to investigate misconduct. On the first anniversary of Marcus's death, David returned to the cemetery. The headstone now bore not just Marcus's name and dates, but an inscription that read, "Teacher, brother, catalyst for change." "You didn't die in vain, little brother," David whispered, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "You made sure of that." As he walked away, David carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the greatest honor you can give to the fallen is to make sure their death means something. To make sure that those who wronged them face consequences. To make sure the world remembers not just how they died, but how they lived, and to make sure that justice, however long delayed, eventually finds its way home.